Rabbi said we're on the illustrious page Beis. We completed the entire page Aleph miraculously, all 13 or 14 lines of it, and we're in the middle of page Beis, where if you're looking at your text, in the middle of page Beis on the side there's a Beis. You see it? Yeah. That Beis corresponds to the old print of the Samach Vav. And all along the margins, throughout the whole Sefer, you'll find old page numbers. So we're in the middle of page Beis, but we're technically the second line from the top of the page in the old prints of the Samach Vav. And in the new prints, it's one line after Beis where it says V'lochein. Rabbi say, Moirai ve'Rabbi say. The conversation we had last week over several classes revolved around the idea experiencing something which is beyond yourself. We called it Teshuva, we called it Reusa DiLiba, experiencing something which is beyond yourself. How could you possibly experience something which is beyond yourself? If it's beyond yourself, which is beyond your experience? And the answer is the neshama. We all have a soul. The soul has many layers. The outer layers of the soul we call the conscious. The inner layers of the soul we call the subconscious, right? The outer layers of the soul we call the chitzonius haneshama. The inner layers of the soul we call the pnimius haneshama. And because we have a pnimius haneshama, because we have an inner soul, we have relationships with things which are beyond who we are as brain, heart, senses people, as human beings, with our brain and heart and our senses. And it's possible to experience the pnimius haneshama. How do you get to the pnimius haneshama? Through the chitzonius haneshama. When you live on the outer level and you know how to dial the right number, you can go from the outer soul to the inner soul. What our Mamer taught us, however, is that there's two basic, and the word basic is important in this case, there's two basic approaches to going from the outer soul to the inner soul. One is desperation. It's bad. It's so bad that I'm in so much pain that I cry out for my inner soul. We call that teshuva. When a person finds himself so compromised, a person finds himself so lost, so defeated, so outside, they cry out. It's possible that that cry should come from the pnimius haneshama. It's possible that cry should come from the subconscious. But it's happening because of a desperation, because they're so pained, they're so far away, that the cry comes from the inner soul. The other is exactly the opposite. That a human being who has achieved some kind of a spiritual plateau, one of my favorite English words, because it's Mamer a Hasidic word, is the word culmination. Look it up in the dictionary. Culminate basically means when you reach a shleimus and then you go past it. Culmination is like the coup de grace. After everything, one more thing. If a person's avodas Hashem's life achieves a certain plateau, it can be culminated by transcendence, meaning I serve Hashem with my mind, my heart. I'm a person. The best I have is my brain, my heart, my senses. If I achieve a certain shleimus, I can open up a window, a portal into my neshama, and experience a connection to Hashem which is bigger than my brain, and it's called Reusa DiLiba, the will of the heart. And the Rabbi told us in the previous classes that the difference between experiencing what is beyond ourselves, experiencing the pnimius hanefesh, experiencing the transcendence of self, if it's coming from desperation, which is called teshuva, or it's coming from transcendence, which is called Reusa DiLiba, the difference is if you experience its richness. When you cry out in teshuva, all you feel is pain. All you feel is what you don't have. You want God, but you're not motivated by your desire for God. You're motivated by your desire to get away from the terrible place in which you find yourself. So your transcendent experience, which is predicated, which is based on desperation, on teshuva, does not involve experiencing godliness, it involves experiencing pain. Reusa DiLiba, on the other hand, where a person plateaus, and the Eibishter gives him a graduation of self, a culmination of self, going past himself, because you earned it, because you did all the work bringing yourself to that place, you even sense what you're not able to sense. Your desire for the transcendent, to use a mystical term, has oyed, has light, has richness, has lichtigkeit, has feel. In other words, you're in touch with something that consciously you're not able to be in touch with. It's beyond your conscious mind. It's from your neshama. It's from your subconscious. But because you got to that place of transcendence, you got to that place of relating to godliness and love beyond yourself, by completing yourself, you're in touch even with things you should not be able to be in touch with. And I illustrated in the previous class, which was Wednesday last, using the example of an educated guess. I think it's a great example. An educated guess is not a guess. To use, I guess, a cliche would be an educated guess is not a guess, it's an approximation. Educated people who know stuff, when they intuit, when they guess about something they don't know, because of all the knowledge they have, even what they don't have, they have a sense of. I told you this, I had a mice with a doctor, where I asked him a question, and he says, I don't know, but I'll give him an educated guess, and I gave him my guess, and of course I thought I was right. I was way off, and he was spot on. He told me I don't know, but my educated guess is, and I was it was sobering. It was a wonderful experience. It was good for me to hear that. The story happened 25 years ago. 25 years ago I knew everything. I've gotten dumber ever since, and I'm happier and happier as I get dumber and dumber. But those days I knew I was know-it-all, and certainly I talk-it-all. But it was a great experience for me to have. It was educational. An educated guess means that if a person is very, very refined and very tuned in, even when you don't know yet, you know already. And it's Lashon Chassid called Oira Seichel. There's light hovering above your conscious mind that sort of titillates you, right? It teases you. It's information that you have not yet been able to process through the normal intellectual process, which involves words and ideas and form and physicality, but you have a sense of it. That's a little bit of a mashal, a tiny mashal, for the sense of transcendence which is associated with the Reusa DiLiba. This is where we're holding Rabbi. So the Rebbe continues, second line, it's not second line, it's the second line after the base. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's 12 lines from the top of the page at the end of the line of page base, last word. V'lachein, the last word in the line, v'lachein, therefore, listen to this. Reusa DiLiba, when a person is experiencing going past himself, based on himself, shesibaso mitad kiruv, that his basis, the motivation for his transcending self is because of how close he is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Inyanu gam ken inyan akiruv. And the will of the heart, the pnimius halei that he's experiencing, is that he wants to have a greater closeness. Says the Rebbe, it's quiet. Why is it quiet? Because it's unbelievably deep. When a person is tuned in, when a person is very, very refined, a person is very, very tuned in, and they're experiencing something even more spiritual than where they're at, it's the ultimate quiescence. You don't want to have any disturbance. You just completely lock in and you sort of get it's quiet. Or b'tshuva, as opposed to tshuva, tshuva comes from distance. Tshuva is not based on where I want to go. Tshuva is based on where I want to get away from. There's a cry, there's screaming, a shouting. And you cry out with a simple voice. Dafka means especially, exclusively, etc. Why? Because the cry is a cry of pain. It's a cry of distance. If I may use words, I would say this to you. Reusa DiLiba is far more sophisticated than Teshuva. But Teshuva may have an advantage. There's an adage which is quoted later in the Samach, which is based on a Tov of one of the earlier Rabbi. I think it's a Tov of the but it's based on a Gemara originally that says, if two people are running, one is running to treasure and one is running from danger. The one running from danger will run harder than the one running towards the treasure. It's considered an axiom. It's called a law in logic, based on a Gemara that says, "Lav kedem lehay." No is always stronger than yes. But Hashem created the world. Negative is stronger than positive. Which is stronger, hate or love? I mean, it's so simple. Huh? Okay, fine. That's the chemistry, right? And when you're running towards treasure, there's also adrenaline. But there's a logical law which is presumed in Torah that says, it's based on a Gemara, it's based on a pasuk, that if one is running to something and one is running from something, the one is running from something is running with more power because, quote, no is stronger than yes. You could say that there's a mila in tshuva but Reusa DiLiba because there's a logical law that says that no is stronger than yes. And you know what the proof is? It's going to be so disappointing. The proof is because it says v'hiyada v'yivekir. When Hashem created the world, night was before day. And the Gemara learns from this, first there's darkness, then there's light. And Chassidus interprets this to mean that negative forces are stronger than positive. As a logical law, in the creation, from the first moment, negative is stronger than positive. That's a Maila and Tshuva of Reusa DiLiba. But Reusa DiLiba is a much more meaningful experience. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
In what way is it stronger? It's strong because they're both accomplishing already the goal. So like one comes faster.
The answer is that there's different layers of pnimius. Because there's Chaya and Yechida, right? And specifically, there are actually layers in Chaya. And as hard as it is to understand it, you can make an argument based on a note from the Rebbe in a Sikha, it is even levels in Yechida. So you would say that if a person is running from his Pnimius HaNeshama towards a Lakus, and another person is running his Pnimius HaNeshama away from Sakana, if they're both investing the same energy, the one running from bad is going to have an advantage. A deeper level of the Neshama is going to be revealed. So Rabbi said we're reading on.
You said he gets it better.
On a higher level. Now, let's keep reading. Nacha Parshuris, please. V'yesh. So what did we just say? What did we just say? If two people are involved in an experience which is beyond them, if two people experience something which is beyond them, but one is conditioned and the other one is not conditioned, what's going to happen? If you have an experience that's bigger than yourself, you're going to scream and shout. But if you're very conditioned, very prepared, like the educated guesser, even though it's beyond you, it's actually going to quiet you. It's actually going to quiet you. And I gave you the example in the earlier class from friction. There's so many great examples for this. Right? If you would see, just think about this hypothetically. If you would go into a room and watch a tzaddik gomer and a tzaddik she'ein gomer standing next to other children davening, who would look like the bigger tzaddik? You see a perfect tzaddik standing side by side with an imperfect tzaddik, and they'd both be davening. Who would look like the bigger tzaddik? The tzaddik she'ein gomer. Why?
Once more.
Huh? There's a logical answer. What?
Perfection is silent.
The tzaddik she'ein gomer will be much more passionate. The tzaddik gomer will be cold like ice. You know why? Because the tzaddik she'ein gomer has a little ra. That little ra creates interference. That little ra creates resistance. And that little ra, resistance, causes noise. Fluidity, right, like a golden wire, or the wire that can carry electricity without making any heat, without any expenditure, is quiet. Reusa DiLiba, huh?
Not the tzaddik she'ein gomer of Tanya. You're saying like a
Even tzaddik of Tanya. Yeah.
Because they don't even experience the rock.
Even when they daven, they do.
Okay.
Meaning to say, a tzaddik she'ein gomer has a job. You know what his job is? To become a tzaddik gomer. Or to say it more precisely, if his ra is at the level of midas, he has to eradicate the rav level of midas and it should be on the level of seichel. If the rav is on the level of seichel, he has to eradicate the level of seichel and it should be left on the level of ratzon. There's a lot of levels in tzaddik she'ein gomer. But tzaddikim she'einam gemurim have a job. And their job amounts to meeting their evil. They can't meet their evil in action, it doesn't affect their action. They meet their evil in emotion. They meet their evil in the ability to understand ideas which are against Torah, for example. And when they meet their evil, there's passion. The passion is the conflict between them and the evil. The tzaddik gomer is fluid. Fluid. So the Rebbe says, the Baal Teshuva makes a lot of noise. The Reusa DiLiba fellow makes no noise at all. Says the Rebbe, however, now this is going to sound ironic, okay, but I'm going to say it this way. Sometimes Teshuva makes no noise, so much noise that you don't hear anything. Look inside, please. Look inside. V'yesh b'Teshuva gamkein. There are occasions when a person does Teshuva, she b'chashoy that it's quiet. Now, if quiescence is associated with conditioning, does that mean a Baal Teshuva who's quiet is conditioned? No. A Baal Teshuva is not conditioned. A Baal Teshuva is always running from evil. A Baal Teshuva is not prepared for the transcendent experience. So how could it be that the Baal Teshuva is quiet? The tendency is that the pain is so deep, he can't even cry out. In other words, the distance is so much that he's crying inaudibly. Look inside. Says the Rebbe, V'hu, and this is, Kasher negeya lo ha'inyan, when the pain, when the distance touches him, b'pnim yisayis it even deeper, ad she'ein b'koychai litzek, he doesn't have the strength to scream. In other words, sometimes a person is quiet, not because he's so tuned in, but because he's in so much pain he can't even shout. The Reusa DiLiba is quiet because he's experiencing the closeness to Hashem. The Baal Tshuva makes noise because he's experiencing distance from Hashem. If a Baal Tshuva is quiet, that's even a greater distance. And his quiescence is not a reflection of being in tune. His quiet is not a reflection of his being conditioned and ready for the Gilui. His quiescence is a reflection of an inability to scream. He can't make a sound. This is, this is called being paralyzed. Sometimes people are in so much pain, they cannot even cry out. But that's not closeness, that's even deeper pain. In other words, when a Baal Tshuva is quiet, he's actually screaming from such a high octave, from such a high velocity, from such a high frequency that you don't hear an audible sound. Let's read. V'hu inyan taikas halev. This is the concept of a crying out of the heart, shalamayla mitaikas akel, which is above the crying of the voice. However, it's not proximity, it's not closeness. Reusa DiLiba means my crying out to Hashem is quiet because I'm so close, I'm so conditioned. Teshuva means my noise comes so far away. And if I'm even further away and I cry out without noise, do not interpret that as being proximity, do not interpret that as being closeness, interpret that as being such a deep pain that I can't even make any noise. And the Rebbe says, V'zehu inyan shvarim teruah. Go ahead.
Can you elaborate more on that, why there's no noise? Like, what is, I don't know, what's the experience that he's having, like, who's making him not be able to cry at all? Or no noise at all?
Okay, what's the philosophy? What's the philosophy? I just need to read one more line. So I'm gonna say, I have 50 minutes. This is the 1 out a week I can stay until 8:45. I'm not running any place. What's the philosophy? Philosophy is this. Koil, voice, everybody knows voice comes from the lungs. In Kabbalah and Chassidus and Zayar, voice comes from the heart. Because there's a presumption that there's a parallel between voice and emotion. Anytime a person speaks, there's some kind of an emotion. And there's something called Pnimiyas HaKoil, which is thought. Anytime a person thinks, it's considered part of the heart, and there's a voice of thought. Okay, that's how it's actually explained in Chassidus based on the Zohar. Okay? Now, what's the rule? So the heart is a source of voice, and just for the record, it says in Chassidus, it says Nayim Beis, and it says probably the Mitler or someplace, that voice is emed, eish mayim ruach, no offer. It's spiritual. Halachically, voice is not a physical thing. Keil, mare, and reach, ein beimamish. Voice, sight, and smell, halachically have no substance, even though chemically they do. But api halacha, keil, mare, reich, ein beim, they have no substance. They're not considered a matter of substance. You can't measure them. So voice is considered eish mayim ruach because it's missing offer. Offer is the tangible of the four elements. It's an intangible. Okay? So here's how the voice works. Think of voice as being something which is coming from the heart and being transmitted through the lungs. If I want to modulate that voice, right? What do we call that? What do we call modulating the voice? We call it speaking or singing. Right? Singing and speaking are very different kinds of modulation, but what they have in common is I want to control my voice. What do I need to do to control my voice? I need to limit it. Right? If I'm talking to you, so the presumption is that my heart is giving passion to my lungs, and my lungs are blowing against my vocal cords, it's creating sounds. I cannot and speak at the same time. It's impossible. To blow and to speak are incongruous. They're a contradiction. So if I want to speak what's called complex form, which is what words are, or music, which is complex, orderly, controlled sound, I have to limit my voice, right? Now, what happens when a person hyperventilates? People hyperventilate for all kinds of reasons, right? If you run a marathon, you hyperventilate. If you're very afraid, you hyperventilate. If you win the lottery, you hyperventilate. You can't speak.
saying like you almost.
Can you shout?
Yes, no.
Depends how hyperventilated you are.
So you said you have to let out so much energy that energy can't even be expressed through speech. It has to be expressed through just nothing.
A cry. And sometimes there's no sound. Hyperventilation means all the air in my heart is coming out of me at once. There's so much passion, I cannot control the flow of air against my vocal cords. So either it comes out as a scream, or it doesn't even come out as a scream. And if I'm hyperventilating, but I have some manageability over I can at least make sound. If you're in danger, you scream. Why do you scream? You want to get people's attention. If you're in really severe danger, it's conceivable that the sound simply does not come out of your lungs because the emotion, which is the basis of that sound, is so overwhelming that the vocal cords can't transmit it even as a cry. There's actually a Hamsech Tov Shel Rosh, which the Rebbe Ayatz repeats in Tzadidal, Tzadikei, and the Rebbe has one Mamer on it in Tishrei Tov Shel Yud Beis that talks through the Sugi of Koil. It's one Mamer in Ateres. It's a few Mamer in Rosh Hashana Ateres, and it's a big arichas. It's 10 Maimorim inside Dal Tzadikei from the Friedrich Rebbe, and the Rebbe has it in one Mamer in Tishrei. I think Tov Shel Yud Beis. Go ahead. Tishrei Yud Gimel, the second Tishrei. There's somebody who wanted to speak. Someone wanted to speak in an audible way, and in a manageable way, and in a controlled way, to relate to each other. So the Rebbe says when a person cries, which is a deep place in the neshama, they don't even have any sound, but it's possible that could be tshuva. So the Rebbe says there's two kinds of quiet. Sometimes the quiet is a proof of intuitus, I'm almost there. And sometimes the quiet is a symptom of the greatest distance. When the quiet is from tshuva, it's a symptom of the greatest distance. When the quiet is from proximity, that's called Reusa DiLiba. So now, Rabbi say, the sound of the shofar is different than the spoken word, correct? Yes? I need you to nod. Rabbi say, I need your attention, please. Yeah. But the sound of the shofar is not only different than the spoken word, the sound of the shofar is different than the sound of the flute, and the trumpet, and the trombone, and what other air instruments you're going to produce. Why? Because musical instruments, which are produce sound by blowing, which is much, much more powerful than speaking, is controlled voice. It's controlled air. I can control the sound. Shofar is not a controllable sound. Now technically there's a tekiya and there's a shvarim and there's a teruah, but the halacha is kol hakolos ksheres b'shofar. Every sound is kosher in the shofar. Why?
As in you can't control the pitch. You might be able to.
You can't control the pitch, right? There's a lot of things. Why?
Each shram is on a different sound. It's just a different, amount of.
Fine. Okay, perhaps. But here's the deal. I've heard people that yank a doodle on their shofar. They're really, really good because the shofar is a cry. And music, even though music is a whole different thing than words, it's still controlled form, so it's limited. So the shofar represents an unlimited cry. I learned a Mamer years ago where the Rebbe Rashab discusses Matan Torah. He says, "V'chol ha'om royes ha'kolos ves ha'shofar." So the Rebbe Rashab says, why do you have two words? They saw the kolos and the shofar. It's one word. So the Rebbe Rashab says, because at the moment of Matan Torah, there was also music. There was music in the shofar. And he explains Kabbalistically, and according to Hasidus, the music was beautiful, and the shofar was visceral, it was guttural, it came from the kishkis of Elokus. The Eibishter produced the sounds of Matan Torah. And the sounds of Matan Torah involved kolos and shofar. Shofar means raw sound, unmanaged sound, just a cry, and kolos means a melody, music. So the Chassidus tells you that the shofar is called kol pnima, an inner voice. The meaning of an inner voice is that it comes from pnimius hanefesh. The language is uniform. Speech is called kol chitzoni. It's an outer voice. That's why I can modulate it. That's why I can control it. The amount of air that's exhaled from my lungs, or as Kabbalah would like you to say, from your heart, is measured and limited. That's why it comes out in individual syllables that are, joined together to create words and sentences and so forth. But when you cry, it's called an inner voice. It's coming from pnimius halev, meaning it's coming from the level of your neshama, which is above your mind. It cannot come out in words. It can only come out in a cry. It's called kol pnima. So the Zohar says there's two inner voices. There's kol pnima de ishtama, the inner voice which is audible, that means you can hear it. And the kol pnima de lo ishtama, the inner voice which you cannot hear. And according to Kabbalah, that's the difference between the tkiya and the shvarim teruah. The tkiya represents the inner voice that you're crying out, but you can hear it. And the shvarim teruah, which is an audible sound, but it's a broken audible sound, is coming to represent the inner voice that has no sound. As I told you earlier, what's the second tkiya? Remember to tell you what I told you? What's the second tkiya? Did anybody remember?
You said the first one is the cry, the second one is
the inaudible cry. What's the second tkiya?
Is the Hashem's answer.
It's Hashem's answer. It says in the pasuk at the very end of David Rosh Hashana, Hashem Elokim b'Sheka Yitaka Yiska, and it says in Chassidus that the Eibishter's answer is the second tkiya. Let's read this one line inside. It says the Heile Kerebe v'Zehu Inyan Shvarim Teruah. When the voice is so deep that even though I'm crying from distance, it comes out without sound because I cannot even muster sound. That's Shvarim Teruah. Bechinis Kala Pnima, an inner voice. The law Ishtama, which is inaudible, you cannot hear it. Kiyadua or Mavur b'Makabach. It's explained in other places. And in footnote 23, you got 6 lines of sources. Six lines of sources. He's mitzayin to, if you look at the end of that paragraph, he's mitzayin to Terav Chelik Beis, and he's mitzayin to Ateres Omet Ezvav. Ateres Omet Ezvav is what I told you. The different scale. It's a Shon like a Hamsech. It's people more than one in you, but one of them is Koy. Now on the previous page, if you go back to page Aleph, the first line of the second paragraph, he said, Sheife b'kavanas haruch v'yin hatshuva v'yin atkiya harishoyna tzaka b'koil pashut mitad yisrael's pas primish v'nefesh his gals b'koil pashut dafke, which is kol pnima. But on the previous page, he spoke about the tkiya, so it's kol pnima de shtama. Now we speak about the shvarim teruah, which is kol pnima de lo shtama. So we juxtapose Teshuva against Reusa DiLiba. Okay? And we're done. Fini. No more Reusa DiLiba. We're going back to Teshuva. What do we know about Teshuva? I'm not going to expect you to remember this. This is before Yom Kippur, for Sukkot. What do we know about Teshuva? That Teshuva is a mitzvah klolis. Right? We have 613 mitzvahs, which correspond to the limbs. And then you have a bunch of stuff which don't correspond to the limbs, they correspond to the organs. Remember? Like the brain and the tongue and the eyeballs. There's a number. I've said it's a shayle. It's a shayle. It's a shayle. The Rambam Paskins, the Rav Nachmech is a mitzvah pratis. But there's a lot of them count as both. Tefillah, tshuva, simcha, emunah. There's a bunch of them. We don't necessarily know all of them, but they correspond to the inner organs. Tshuva is a mitzvah klolis. And the Rebbe just spent a bunch of lines explaining to us that Teshuva is a mitzvah kolos by juxtaposing it against the Reusa DiLiba. So look inside. Nimtza, it turns out. The line that begins with the word Pnima, I'm going to guesstimate it's 12 lines from the bottom of page base. Nimtza, the shofar hu inyan hatshuva, the kant of the shofar is inyan hatshuva, and we're going with the posit that Teshuva is not a mitzvah pratis, Teshuva is a mitzvah kolos. If you remember the shurim I gave you before Yom Tov, there's 3 things. The mitzvah pratis of tshuva, which is vidoy, the confession. The mitzvah klaus of tshuva, which is the tshuva itself. And then there's the inyan atzmi of tshuva. The idea that we do tshuva because we're the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and that's the concept of itzumoy shel yoyim mechaped, that the kapara happens because it's Yom Kippur by itself. It has to do with the fact that the Jew and God are one. Questions or comments or any other kind of verbiage or verbiage, as I like to call it.
Which mitzvah kol responds to the lungs?
Oh, I don't have a clue. The Rebbe told a fellow who complained to the Rebbe that he had something in the prayer. The Rebbe told him he should do be mahader the mitzvah of hashgacha pratis.
The brain, you said?
Whoever heard of hashgacha mitzvah?
Look at everything.
That you should pay attention to the little details in your life and see the hashgacha.
For everything.
Huh? It's part of Emunah. But that's what the Rebbe told him. The brain is an Eiver Klali. Choose a mitzvah clause, and the mitzvah you should choose, you should be Mahadir. The Rebbe told him, be Mahadir the mitzvah of Hashgacha Pratis. So what's the lungs? I don't know what. Maybe the lungs is singing to the Eivishter. Until your kishkas come out. There was a Jew who I didn't really know, but I remember seeing him. His name was Meir Abu Chatzir, Meir Abesera. Meir Abu Chatzir was the B'nan Shekadesh Elyon. His uncle, Mamish, his uncle was the Baba Sali. I think the Baba Sali was his father's brother. Meir Abesel left Morocco when they all left before the 6-Day War, moved to France, and let's just say he left the path in a hurry. But he came back just as quickly. He was about Teshuva. And he has a very interesting relationship with the Rebbe. He did not live in Crown Heights. He lived in East Flatbush. I do not know why. He was not here Shabbos, but he came to the weekday Fabrengens. And if you could picture the Rebbe up on the platform, you're facing the Rebbe, he would stand on the bench, at the back of a bench, to the Rebbe's left. And whenever he came...
Did he have a beard?
Yeah, he had a beard, he had a big hat. He looked so distinctive. There was something about him. You saw him, you stopped and looked again. He was one of those people that he had a presence. He had a very unusual presence. And Mamer Bechatzeretz would come to the Fabrengens, weekday Fabrengens, and anytime he came, they would turn around at some point in the Fabrengen and do this. And he would whistle. He knew how to whistle. He would whistle, and you would watch him whistle, and his whole body would writhe, like as if he was having some of an ecstatic experience, you know. He would whistle till his lungs would come out. See, he told somebody, I didn't hear it from him, but he told somebody, that what could we do for the Rebbe? The Rebbe asked me to blow. So I have to blow till there's nothing left in my lungs. In other words, when you watch him whistle, and he's literally writhing, he's doing this. He's not going to stop. He's going to blow until there's nothing left, you know. This was his mitzvah close of the lungs. The Rebbe told him to blow, and he's going to blow. I highly doubt that that's the mitzvah, but that's the point. And I once heard, again, I don't have reliable to that Rabbi J.J. Hechtel of Shalom was by the Rebbe on some occasion, and the Rebbe said to him, it's a pity that Meir Buchatzir was missing at the last Fabrengen. Hat mir nicht gekannt pfeifen, so I couldn't whistle. If I would have whistled, we would have made more Bali Tshuva. You imagine? In other words, Meir Buchatzir would come, and the Rebbe would do this, and he would blow, and all the other people in 7-7 would whistle along him, but his whistling was something else. You could literally hear it in the whole shul.
That's who was...
Yeah, always to him. He would turn around to him, he stood behind the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, we could have made more Bal Tshuvas. So what do we know about the Rebbe's whistling? Okay, let's have a mind.